is in the middle of the state of Guanajuato. Guanajuato is also in the middle of the country. It's about 5 or 6 hours away from Mexico City. So I grew up there, and I came to the United States when I was about 4 years old. I turned 5 here in 1992. And we went from living in about a middle class environment, and some of my relatives are wealthy. So some of them are high class, and my experience was middle class, upper middle class, depending on who I was around. Like my grandpa was a little better off, to then coming into the United States living in a trailer park. So we lived in a trailer park with a lot of us. It was like maybe 14 people. So it was a very abrupt shift from having like a very middle income sort of lifestyle, your own room, your own play place, you have your cousins, your grandma, your whole community, and then to boom, being dropped into the middle of nowhere in rural Colorado. And Irapuato is not a massive city, but it's not a rural, this where I was at was not a rural area. It wasn't, a lot of people say in Spanish, no era un rancho, o sea, es una ciudad, it's like a proper little city. So that was a big cultural shift. And I had to learn English. I remember not speaking English, and English sounded like wah, 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 like Charlie Brown, wah, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's a tough language to learn, and people are often very like, I think, difficult about people who don't speak English, and it's just so challenging. But I was fortunate because I came at an age where I was able to learn the language, and I was also very, very smart. And so my teachers saw that in me, and they invested a lot of time and energy. And I got a lot of help. I got a lot of one-on-one help. So I remember there was a moment where I was learning English in ESL, and all the kids were like, Diego, ¿por qué estás hablando inglés? No hables inglés porque aquí estamos los demás y no hablamos inglés. And they just didn't want me to speak English. And I remember just being like, well, like my mom and dad are going to be mad if I don't speak English, if I don't do well in school. So I have to learn English, but they didn't. And that same group of people would go on to drop out of high school and not finish high school. And that was interesting for me because that was probably about 10 or 15 people in that group who didn't or wouldn't finish high school. And then when I moved to, this was in Olathe, I moved to Montrose, Colorado, which is nearby Telluride. Telluride has like Oprah living in that area. Tom Cruise has a home he's been trying to sell for years. And Ralph Lauren has a massive ranch, like a massive, massive ranch. I think he may be one of the people who owns the most amount of private land in the state of Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. But that area is a retirement community. So you experienced massive wealth and massive poverty. And being Latino, definitely more poverty than anything else, right? And being also Latino and Spanish speaking, you're constantly aware of being the outsider. And because I grew up in Mexico, I was very aware of culture, you know, and how that works. So fast forward to my business now, you know, I do a lot of work in Spanish. I do Spanish language content, television, and I ended up majoring in film and television. So then I kind of bounced around for a while trying to find my way in the world, until eventually I realized that there was a lot of money in advertising. So I focused a lot of my energy into specifically this agency in Boulder, Colorado. I worked with them for a while. That opened up a lot of doors to me working in Miami. And then while I was in Colorado, I was directing a television show in Spanish called Xfinity Latino. And it was great. I saw the value of working on my Spanish, and I still feel like I can improve, because in English, of course, I'm using it more daily. But I read Spanish and I speak Spanish, and a lot of, for me, it was as a young child realizing there's value in the language, but also that if you're not skilled, that maybe you don't have those opportunities. So there was just a lot of pressure, and then I became kind of known for speaking Spanish in my circles, so much so that the next project I've lined up is a Spanish speaking or a Spanish language commercial, and that's always kept me busy. At one point, I was being flown out to Miami to do some commercials for Verizon Wireless, which was a lot of fun. Love Miami. Toda la gente habla español allá. Me encanta la ciudad de Miami. And then I think also I started to realize something that was really interesting about the Latino experience in America. And that's how many people are ashamed of being Latino. You know, there's a real sort of like, my experience has been, there's two camps. There's a person who's like really leans on being Latino and then doesn't assimilate, or the person who like is a Trump supporter and is heavy into not being Latino, and they kind of feel like, I gotta like prove how not I am the other to this group of typically white Americans. And my experience was a lot of pressure to pick a camp, like, hey, Diego, you pick a side. And like I shared in that anecdote when I was younger, I'm really resistant to picking a side. I'm more like, that's not reality. Like, nor is it true that I'm going to be heavily assimilating to the point where I forget who I am and then, you know, become a supporter of something I don't believe in, nor am I going to become so, I guess, intentionally exclusive to my own culture that I don't participate at all. And I think that, you know, to be Latino, to be someone from Mexico, para ser mexicano, la idea es conectarte con la gente. And so, like, I think naturally you want to connect. You want to connect with people. You want to build a relationship with people. And that's something that I feel like is a cultural value I got growing up in Mexico, being in Mexico. And also my experience was, and this isn't true for everyone, nor is it the right or wrong experience, but my grandma, my grandpa specifically, they're all ethnically what you would call white. So I grew up around white relatives, and that's colored, I guess it has colored my experience of people, because my grandpa's family came from Seville, Spain, after Franco Francisco took out a lot of the private land holdings. So my great grandpa left Spain, went to Guanajuato and settled. And then my grandpa had blue eyes and just was white. My mom's side of the family, when I spent time with her cousins, they were all white. So I just saw that Mexicans can be any color. A Mexican person can be black, white, Asian. It doesn't matter. You know, it's not a race, it's a nationality. So you can be, you know, American and have different colors. You can be Mexican and have different colors. So I didn't necessarily have a problem associating with what people call white people, white Americans, but it did play a role in my siblings not feeling like they could assimilate. And so I think where a lot of my success came from was feeling like I was fluid and being able to connect with people of all backgrounds. Because as far as I knew, you could be Mexican, I could be, no importa, cualquier persona puede ser mexicano. But then, you know, not using that limiting belief that because they didn't look like me, we couldn't get along. And that was very helpful. And you know, just to wrap it up, to at least relative to your question about the pandemic, yeah, I mean, that was pretty troubling. I have multiple business partnerships with different businesses that I run, all of them in film. Well, the one that got hit the biggest was my business partner and I in Colorado, which is ultimately why I ended up in Los Angeles. But we had a production company, we still do, that was doing pretty good amounts of work in Colorado. And we had $40,000 queued up with one contract, and we had other projects queued up, and they all collapsed. So we immediately got hit really hard. And on top of that, we have overhead. So I have a studio still in Colorado that I pay for and have paid for 3 years. We signed a 3-year lease, and we still had a year left. And we had 2,600 monthly, roughly, maybe more, actually, you know, considering everything else. So that's just overhead, and we weren't making any money. So we were basically just bleeding money. And we were just like struggling. We're like, what are we going to do? That didn't go through. I remember my business partner and I were in a meeting, and I was like, hey, Tyler, this is a problem. We're in bad shape. This thing is going to be really bad. And he's like, Diego, it can't be that bad. I said, no, man, the WHO just announced that this is a problem. This is going to be a big issue for us. And he's like, it can't be that bad. People are blowing it out of proportion.
Yeah.
Sure enough, his I think wife called immediately and said, hey, I've been furloughed. Let's talk.
Wow.
And he left immediately. And I was like, I'm telling you, man, it was a problem. Now, I had no idea how that was going to totally affect my life, but I had a sense that something was off when the WHO announced it was going to be a problem. And it really just threw us for a tailspin. And my life became about making sure I didn't go bankrupt for the next, 9 months. It was very, very, very stressful. Just to basically everything in my life was like, I can't go bankrupt. I have to figure this out. I have 2,600 I have to pay no matter what happens. And we were able to talk to our landlord. They were very, very kind to us. We said, hey, we can't afford. I mean, right now, if we pay you, the graph says we're going to run out of money by this date. Can we pay you a month from now? Can you give us at least a month to figure things out? And they were kind enough to give us some space to figure that out. And it was really stressful for both of us. And it meant for Tyler, he had to basically take work in the East Coast. So he is a very talented line producer. He's able to do a lot of different things. He worked on the East Coast making movies for, I believe it was Lifetime and Hallmark, or independent films of that nature.
Yeah.
And then I got really back into freelancing, which I hadn't been doing as much. I'd been mostly working on this production company with him. And I was fortunate that I found my footing. I also said yes to everything. I took on a lot of work that I normally wouldn't do, and I had to lower my rates a lot. And I remember I took on 2 big projects that I normally would never have done under the price points. And it was painful because the filming wasn't the hard part. One of them was an animation project. I'm not a great animator, but I know After Effects well enough, and I know how to animate. And another one was an educational series. And on top of that, I just said yes to everything that came my way. I just had to. It was like, yes to this, yes to that project. Hey, do you want to do this thing for a couple $100? Things that I hadn't, like, I'd leveled up, so I didn't do those things anymore. Finally, I was like, yeah, whatever Yes, like I have to say yes to everything.
Wow.
So just taking on every commitment at the very beginning. And as luck would have it, I had a big contract. You know, the Spanish language show I mentioned early on, that got canceled because of COVID. So I had
Wow.
been doing this show for about 4 years in Spanish, and it was really my steady Eddie contract. It wasn't the most lucrative, but it was always around. That
Yeah.
went away. And as soon as that hit, it was like just everything's red, falling apart. And even at the time, you know, I was in a relationship, and that's no longer the case. And part of it was COVID put a lot of pressure on that relationship as well. It was
Wow.
everything in my life just was like there. And then I just had to say yes. And I was able to get through it through a lot of the contacts I had in LA and in Miami and in other parts of the world. And also just like I said, saying yes to everything. And it wouldn't be until ultimately, I would say, right as that stuff was ending, until I really started hitting the summertime, that a lot of my contacts in New York, panned out. I had a friend do a project. I moved out to LA temporarily. I moved in with a producer. We did a project. She's like, hey, I don't have a lot of money. Do you want to shoot and edit a project with some models from for Project Runway? I said,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So I came out, stayed at her place, at her pad. I shot the piece, and she goes, I don't want to edit it myself. Do you want to edit the piece as well? And I was like, yeah, I mean, what do you have? And she goes, I don't have a lot of money. And I said, at this point, anything is good. And she was really kind of helped out that I was doing stuff, and I was in LA, and people were like, hey, Diego's in LA. This is cool. And I'd been meeting people for years, planning to move to LA for a while. And
Yeah.
then finally, I was in a spot where I just started reaching out to people and saying, hey, what's going on? What's going on? I'm around. Let me know if you need help with anything. And people were like, that's cool, man. I appreciate you, Diego. Appreciate the hustle, bud. And then once I went back to Colorado, because I was still living in Colorado at the time,
Yeah.
I'd completed the project. It wasn't a lot of money. It was enough to get me by, enough to put a little bit away in the bank. I'd also been saving to buy a house for about
Mm.
5 years, and I was going to get married and buy a house. So I had this money saved up. And then, the pandemic hit, and I was like, well, I have money saved, so I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And suddenly this work just started flooding in, and all the work I'd said yes to suddenly caught up with me. And I was working 24/7, like sleeping, yeah, crazy hours, just sleeping 3 hours. Sometimes I'd go home and sleep for 2 or 3 hours. And then I'd get up in the middle of the night, keep working, then pass out for 2 or 3 hours.
That's insane.
I know. I remember a friend being like, your sleep hygiene's awful. And I was like, I know, but I gotta survive. This is rough. And being Latino, and I'm sure maybe you have a tough dad too, or a tough mom.
Yeah.
They instill within you that work ethic. So I just worked 24/7 as much as I could for about a good 4-6 months. I remember in August of 2020, I was like, what am I doing? I'm working so much. I was on a project for Google. I'd said yes to a wedding that I hadn't done a wedding in years. I was just saying yes to everything. And I finally had to do it. And I was just like trying to survive and just working nonstop. Well, eventually what ended up happening is I ended up doing really well in 2020. I made more money in 2020 than I had in years.
That's wild.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah. So it resulted in the relationship that I was in ending, unfortunately, which was really painful for me. It
Yeah.
resulted in my business partner and I being able to cover our rent, and then me just doing a lot of work. And it set me up to the point where at the end of 2020, I just thought, I got to get out of Denver. I got to go back to LA. I got to chase my dreams. And so in
Wow.
that time,
What a big change.
yeah.
And how would you say is it transition from Colorado to LA to actually what kind of made you finally make that jump? I'm sure there was things holding you back from just doing it.
Yeah. Well, I moved to LA when I was 20 the first time.
Oh, wow.
It went really poorly, Peter. Let me tell you, I would call and cry and tell my mom every day, mamá, no sé qué estoy haciendo acá en Los Ángeles. Nada está pasando como me imagino. No sé qué hacer. Mira, Dieguito, no chilles. No seas chillón, mijo. Yeah, she's like, stop crying. And
Yeah.
she's like, it's okay if you have to cry. Because when I moved out to LA the first time in 2008, there was the economy crash. And you remember that time, and it was really hard, and it was really surreal, and I worked so hard, and nothing was clicking. So it was very overwhelming. But since that happened, it was terrible. And man, it was super, super humbling. I remember going back to Denver being like, to finish college, not sure if I was going to even finish film, because I just thought maybe this isn't for me. So I hit a real low point. I mean, I was depressed. It was bad. And I got a lot of help. I started talking to just people about the issues. I would, I didn't necessarily get mental health help that time, but I did get a lot of support.
Yeah.
So my story really starts there. Like, moved to LA, everything's great, crash and burn. And then in 2008, because I crashed and burned so hard, I made a promise to myself. I said, I'm going to go back to LA one day.
Yeah.
I've got to rebuild, and I'm going to do it. And so every year,
Yeah.
starting in like 2000, like maybe 14, when I started being able to save money, I would go out to here in LA for at least 2 weeks every year. Even if I didn't have money, maybe I just had a couple thousand in the bank account, which sounds like a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
time to me was a lot of money. That I was like, you know, when you come from a broke family, having a couple of grand in the bank, you feel rich. So, but I would come out and I would just sort of meet people, and I told people my story. I was like, hey man, I came out here and I struggled and I crashed and burned. People were like, oh, don't worry about it. What happened? And that was helpful because I thought I was going to become a director, you know, through what I was hearing and people say, which was, you come out, you work as a talent assistant, you know, an assistant at a management company, a trainee, you work your way up in UTA,
Yeah.
William Morris, CAA, whatever it is. Well, that wasn't for me, Peter. The path for me was going to be different. What I realized that was I had a different strength, and my strength was I'm very technically minded, and I'm gifted in the technical arts, probably like your friend there who's good at animation.
Yeah.
I'm a good cinematographer, a good director, a good animator, a good editor. So that's where my strength was. And it took me suffering a really brutal setback and being embarrassed, and my brothers and sisters being like, Diego, no puedes, que estás haciendo? You're wasting the family money. I remember I took the non-paid internship, which now they're not as common, but I took a non-paid internship. And my dad was like, ¿por qué estás trabajando por gratis, Diego? Si quieres trabajar por gratis, te voy a decir que puedes trabajar gratis por mí recogiendo la basura. My dad does construction, so he's like, you can work for free for me picking up trash.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I know, man. You know how Latino parents are. They're like,
hard on you.
¿Qué te están pagando? ¿Qué estás haciendo? No seas tonto. But basically realizing that I needed to do that in the film industry, I think that's if you think about class, I think what you get from being affluent, whether you're white, black, whatever, you can afford taking those non-paid internships. When you're Latino, coming from a working class environment, man, it is painful. And I remember that. So really, you know, to answer your question, it wasn't that hard because I had been planning for it for about 14 years.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is like it's like your upbringing also trained you to be strong during the difficult times, that even what you went through in 2020, you never stopped hustling. And you said yes to a lot of opportunities that were coming your way, but you caught up to it. Kind of just shows your grit and the sacrifice you made. Most people don't want to make that sacrifice. And it's kind of funny right now going on in 2022. A lot of people I'm sure you're aware, restaurants and the place, there's a shortage of workers, but it's like they need to have the mentality you have to want to work hard to get where they want to be. Because even right now, as you're producing different things, you had to get to that point. And like you said, you kind of set yourself up in your early 20s to kind of come out to LA and then envision it. I kind of saw you envisioning, I'm going to be back here. And there was that will behind it. And that's what people need to have. And I love and respect that you never gave up. And I would, for people listening, is like, you always have to have that ambition, but also the will to keep moving forward, because life is going to knock you down. I just think of the Rocky movie. I think it was Balboa.
Oh yeah,
How hard, yeah, you hit, but it's how you get back up. That's what it's all about. It's getting back up. And I feel like your story kind of encompasses that, of you kind of rising above those challenges. And even I know you were mentioning about you being in the industry of film and even directing as well. What kind of led you in that direction? Like, what made you say, "Oh, I want to go ahead and do this and start this career"?
It's a really good question. Well, when I was in Mexico as a child, I wanted to be an actor. I remember as a child, Mexico being like, "Mamá, yo quiero ser un actor un día, me gustaría estar en la televisión." And so I grabbed a little hammer and I was going to smash the TV to crawl in there. And she's like, no, mijo, así no trabaja todo. And she explained to me how it works. And there's this film that came out that hasn't gotten a lot of press called Belfast that Kenneth Branagh made. It does a really good job at capturing the immigrant experience. Now, that story is about an Irish person leaving Ireland to go to the UK, England. I think it's London even specifically. But, you know, they kind of show what it's like when you have to leave a country of origin. And for me, it was just, I wanted to be an actor. And then when I was in high school, I did really well in math and science, and everyone's like, hey, you're Latino, and everyone's like, you're gonna be successful, you have to be a doctor, right? And in the back of my head, I was like, I want to be a filmmaker, I want to be an artist, I want to act. So I did research, and turns out actors at that point made on average 45,000 a year. And I was like, that sounds broke. What it sounds like to me is broke. I don't want to be 45,000. And I was like, but aren't actors rich? And you look at the graph and it's like, well, yeah, the outliers, but by and large, 35 to 45K is the annual that I saw there. And I was like, it's a bummer. And I was like, I come from being broke and debt. And I thought, well, it's not bad. Like people were saying, oh, well, that's what, you know, teachers make. And I thought, yeah, but I don't want to be like a teacher. So then I Googled more and I said, what else? And this is, you know, I'm looking I'm in high school in 2005. So I'm in 2005 looking at this stuff and I go, okay, what else is there? And good on this school, the high school, to make me take a class on this. So I had the time to do it. But then I saw that video producers can make up to 90,000. And I was like, oh, that's money.
Yeah.
I want to make money. So I thought, okay, how do I do that? How do I get closer to six figures? And that's what made me pivot into thinking about, is there a thing that I can do that's still around it, that I can do acting, that I can do producing? And I've been fortunate that I did acting full time for a year. I was a host for Walmart and I was like doing
Wow.
a campaign, which is great. I've done commercials for Domino's Pizza. I've done bank commercials. I've been on TV. I did a made for TV movie that ran in Colorado for about a year. And people were like, hey, I recognize you're that guy. And I was like, yeah. So a little moment of that. And it felt cool,
Cool.
man. It felt really good. I've loved acting. And I have an agent even still to this day. But yeah, it was, I think, wanting to do that and then wanting to be around it, and also not wanting to be broke, because I knew that my parents were only going to help so much. So I just had to set myself up, financially. And then you didn't ask this, but I wanted to comment on what you brought up, which is about people working hard and hustling. What I've come to realize about this is, no matter what you want to do, you have to make it worth it to you. So if someone wants something, you have to think about, what's that carrot on the stick going to be for you? And I can guarantee you that, Peter, for you and for me, it might be different. But, I had so many, well, a common thing for Latinos that we hear is like, échale ganas, Diego, échale ganas, échale ganas. And what does that even mean? Literally, it's like, give it strength or give it value. But it's empty. It's like,
yeah,
who can, like, we all know that échale ganas, but what clicked for me was like, so that what happens? Like, what's the carrot on the stick? So for me, it was like, I wanted to get through that thing so that one day I could see myself making movies. And that's different. And you have to be willing to fail, and you have to be willing to be humiliated. Not that you need to go out of your way, but you have to be willing to do that for something that you care about, So like, if you wanted to secretly be like, I don't know, a businessman, and I don't know what you want to do, Peter, I should ask you that, but if you wanted to be a businessman and you love making a difference in the world, but you hate dealing with like, investors, it's going to be really hard for you to deal with the investor. You have to craft your own carrot on the stick, and it's going to vary. And in my film program, there were a lot of people who were like, I just want to make a living in film. It doesn't have to be whatever. Now I want to win an Oscar. Now, do I really need to win an Oscar to be happy? No, I mean, it's taken me this far and there's no need. One of my loose acquaintances is Barry Jenkins. We both volunteered at the Telluride Film Festival in the same time, and wouldn't ever call him like a close friend, but I was around him and we chatted a few times, and he did Moonlight. He won Best Picture for Moonlight. And I remember the year that it came out, they introduced it like, this is going to be a great film. And I watched it. And today it's one of my favorite movies of all time. So to think that I know the director of one of my favorite movies of all time is incredible. And he did what I always wanted, which is he volunteered at the Telluride Film Festival for a number of years. I did the student symposium like he did. We got in, and I always would go and have gone with the intent of like learning how to one day win Best Picture. Well, Barry did it. He actually went to the festival. He's since run, I think, the shorts programming, and he won the Oscar for Best Picture. And it's a great film. It's a really wonderful movie, well made. And I mentioned that because it brought to life, I was editing a promo for the Spanish language TV show, and I saw him there and I was like, that's Barry. I know Barry. I've hung out with him. When Moonlight came out that day, I said, hey, or that year, I ran into him in passing. I said, hey, I really love what you've done. Congratulations on everything, man. Well done. And I don't think he even remembered me. I think to this day, he probably wouldn't know who I am. He's spoken to other, students who, through our social network, he's, been a part of that, which is great. And he's still in touch with some of my friends in that loose network because we did a symposium, but it was really eye-opening to be like, it's possible. Now that's my carrot on the stick, but I think that to your point about making the hard work, it's like, it's not just enough to tell people to work hard. You have to find what you really care about. And that's going to take time. And probably you don't want to tell anybody. I don't know what it is for most people who are going to listen, but no one wants to really know what matters to you. I mean, it's scary to really say like, I always wanted to buy my mom that car. I always wanted to have, because it's going to sound silly, but you have to just be honest with yourself about it and say, this is what I care about. And I think that if you can do that, if you can find, I kind of look at it like you have to find your light in the tunnel. Like you always hear that, right? You have to go after the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think most people of color, I can say from my experience, don't even know that it's possible. You can strike the match to create your own light in the tunnel. And you have to find that, whatever it is. Once you have it, you will be unstoppable because nothing will get in your way. You might get slowed down, you might get whatever, but it's super hard to get up once you've been knocked down if you don't know why you're getting up. If you get knocked down, you might just stay there and be like, well, this is a lot better to stay down here. But if you go, you know what, I'm being knocked down, but there's, at least for me, it was like, I know I can do this. Even when I was suffering in 2008 and I thought, I know I can do this. What I, didn't have a car, I know I can do this. And even now I know I can do this. So that's easy. But now I spend a lot of time trying to get people to find it for themselves, like find what will ignite that passion, whatever it is. That's so important for people. And I think that one of the reasons why I was excited about your project is I think that mostly that kind of mentorship is lacking in first generation Latinos and second generation Latinos, because our families are so focused on surviving. I'm the way I am because I experienced a different life in Mexico. I didn't experience poverty in Mexico. I experienced wealth, and not all of it was wealth, and I would say that I'm sure my mom would be like, oh, we weren't rich. No, we weren't rich, but we never, at the time that we were there, for most of it, we didn't struggle to have our needs met. I lived a normal life, and then my grandpa and my aunt, some of whom are wealthy, I've experienced wealth through them. And you're like, wow, it's possible to change my mind and outlook on money. But if you come from a working class, you almost can't,
Yeah. And thank you for even clarifying that as well, because you're right. There is working hard, but then the purpose behind it, the motivation, I think is key. And like yourself, it's safe to say that you enjoy what you're doing, and then it makes you just want to keep going harder. And what I love about that too is people, like you said, need to find what they enjoy doing. And I believe, too, I'm a firm believer that everyone has their God-given skill set that is given to you. Like you mentioned earlier, you know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And so you're going to lean more into doing your strengths, and that's perfectly fine, because now you know that there's other people that you can kind of rely on to help you with any projects. And same thing with things in life. I feel like even in our culture, even people, other minorities, is they need to understand that we have our strengths, but it's not bad to have someone balance you out, get the help, but at the same time, us working hard for our purpose. And like you're saying, it's right. It's if we don't know what the carrot on the stick is, or sometimes I like to think of the Twinkie on the stick or something. It's like you're not gonna push yourself to get there, and it's even worse because if you don't have a motivation or purpose in your life, you could get depressed, and that's even worse because or upset and bitter in life. And I've seen that, both sides, where someone like yourself, I can tell you're working hard, you're joyful, and sometimes you have your moments like, yeah, you're busy, you're stressed out. That's perfectly normal, but you're motivated to keep moving forward. Versus someone else, they're just always having this negativity within themselves, which is perfectly fine because they need to, like you said, light that match themselves and find their way out of the tunnel or any dark place and find the inner self to be like, I want that for myself, whatever it is, because whatever your skill set is, you're going to align with it, you're going to enjoy it, you're going to feel like you're serving the world. The same way with your films, you're going to be serving the world, giving a different perspective for Latinos. And so that's something that I love that you said, because you're right, I was mentioning about working hard, but that's just not it either. It's like what it's I'm sure the rich would want us just to work hard and not have a purpose. But if you were to have it, I'm sure that you'll have more fulfillment and more joy and more excitement. And so thank you for stopping there and even just sharing those details. And just for me, as we're kind of like nearing the end of the podcast, I want to ask you, what are your future plans for 2022 with your studio and your plans and your projects?
Great question. So I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, I want to film this short film. And the reason why I care about it so much is that I have an actor from the show Parks and Rec in the piece. He's already filmed all of his stuff. So I just want to try to get that completed. I want to bring completion to that. I want to finish editing what you saw. You saw the pitch already that I'm trying to do to streaming platforms. So we have an editor, but I think I need to be the person who wraps it up. I directed it. I want to make sure I do the final touches. So it's a lot of just bringing to completion these outstanding projects. And then finally, just trying to really make movies. I think that's the challenge, is that I've been fortunate to have a successful career in advertising. I'll continue to do that. I'd love to make the pivot so that I can make money come from narrative work. So right now, my primary source of income is taking a big step back. The industry is advertising. So I produce commercials and so on, promotional content, and then shifting that or opening up the possibility for me to have that and, directing screenplays, or I should say directing films, writing screenplays, that kind of thing.
No, and thank you so much just for sharing that, and even just some of the tips and advice just during this podcast. And thank you so much for making the time. I know you're a busy man, and excited to do hopefully in the future a follow-up and even seeing some of your projects come to light. down the road. But I just want to say, Diego, thank you so much for your time and for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope someone gets some value out of this. I'm excited for people to follow their dreams.